Well, thanks everyone for joining us. And you know, this is a fascinating time. Media fragmentation is kind of affecting sort of every part of our ecosystem. So I'm excited for today. It's adding complexity to platform selection and media mix for our advertisers and media buyer members. It's making programming for some folks who might be in the building here and audience engagement much more complex for Turner and the media companies. And figuring out how to measure all this, well, I think we'll just go with it's fun. So hopefully you'll leave today with both sort of insights at a high level that help bring understanding to the world we're living in, and some actionable things that you could take back and work together with your teams tomorrow. We'll touch on context and how programming can prime the advertising that follows it and make it more effective. We'll talk about the impact of ads on a tiny little mobile screen and how that compares to watching it on a big TV screen. We'll talk about the state of cross-platform measurement, and I'm sure Howard will say a few words on how the industry really needs collaboration to move that forward. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors. We couldn't have the lovely drinks and wine and cheese at the end without a little bit of help, so we really appreciate IRI and Turner, especially Howard and Turner for hosting us here today. And I want to, in advance, thank all of today's speakers who you'll be seeing today. Regarding getting started, let me, we're going to start today by sharing some findings from the ARF's original research studies. So this will be the third year in a row we've brought original research together. Let me introduce Dr. Manuel Garcia-Garcia, SVP of Research at the ARF. Manuel is our lead on ad effectiveness measurement. He's from Spain originally, spent some time at Nielsen Neuro, making his way to the ARF. And he's really a global thought leader on neuroscience applications to marketing challenges. So without further ado.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. What's my clicker? Well, thank you everyone for coming. We're super happy to be here in hot and sunny Atlanta. It's great. So I'm going to talk a little bit, and there's a lot more, and you're always happy to ask me a question and follow up later, and there are publications and some of our research. So I'm going to just revise some of the data points, some of the insights that we concluded after last year's research project, and then I'm going to introduce a little bit what we're doing this year. That's going to be mostly unveiled in audience measurement, but it's very exciting, everything that came out of our original research project, how advertising worked in 2016. So when we initiated or reinitiated this original research program, we did it with two C-suite fundamental questions in mind, right? Do my marketing dollars drive growth and sales? And if I have $1 extra, where do I put it? And how do I invest it? So in our cross-platform world, there's not like an easy question to answer. So obviously we couldn't do it without you guys. So what we did is actually to gather 40 industry leaders that was in downtown Manhattan at the GFK headquarters. Probably some of you were there. And then we're debating what are the questions that need to be answered to answer these two fundamental questions. And we came up with 3 different experiments. One was in mobile research quality that I'm not going to be talking about today, but if you have questions, just ask me later. And the 2 other projects were based on how to improve effectiveness on a cross-platform campaign. One using mostly attribution modeling and marketing mix model for ROI data, and the other one focused on creative strategy, for which we use different KPIs, but mostly biometrics and neuroscience. So that resulted in those 3 experiments. It was an investment of $1 million. You can see all the partners here, many of you see yourself there, and it was a great adventure. So these are like the 5 hypotheses, main questions that we have. How should I invest across platforms? Which platforms are most effective together? It's probably not the same. And is it different for different verticals? That is actually differ by demographic, because we know like different demographics have different patterns of media use. How can I optimize my digital spend? and what's the most effective creative strategy. So we did a lot of work, a lot of work, to try to answer these questions. So here, in this data that you're seeing on the screen, we went over 3,200 campaigns, ranging from one platform to up to 10 different platforms across a lot of different verticals. And what we saw is that advertising across platforms delivers higher return of investment. So on average, advertising on 2 platforms, the controlling for spend, was delivering 19% higher ROI than on 1 platform. And there's 23% when we were talking about 3 platforms, and up to 35% when we were talking about 5 platforms. What was shocking is this is between 2010 and 2015. So maybe data by 2017 would be a little different, but 1/3, 29%, so almost 1/3 of those 3,200 campaigns, they were only on 1 platform. So that's kind of shocking. But this is very general, obviously, and not all platforms are created equal. So what's the best combination of platforms to increase your ROI? So then we looked at that too within this huge database of 3,200 campaigns. So we saw that adding print or adding radio to your television spend resulted in an increase of about 20% of ROI, but adding digital to the TV spend resulted in what we call a kicker effect of up to 60% higher return of investment. So that's great, and that sort of makes sense, also considering media use. But is that equal and consistent across all the different verticals? That's like the obvious next question, and that's the question that normally comes up at this point of the presentation, and then we're ready to answer. So we looked at this data here. So the previous data was indexed to just TV. Here it's indexed to TV and print or TV and radio because it was similar. And we see that for those categories with a higher purchase cycle frequency, that you buy more often and that maybe require doing less personal research, those that are called like low involvement categories. They combine adding digital to TV on top of TV and radio or TV and print. The increase was not as high as for different categories. So you can see here 12, 13, 16%. But then for those so-called high involvement categories, like personal, travel, entertainment, or pharma, that kicker effect was a lot higher, even up to 87% we found. But why is that, right? So we went and looked into more specific digital tactics, like the effect of paid search on these different types of categories. And we saw that for those low involvement categories, paid search is not delivering as much, as you can see. So even paid search added to TV was not delivering as much. But for the high involvement categories that you'd probably go and search on the internet after you've been triggered by a TV ad, the combination, the synergy of TV and paid search was a lot higher, with about 113% higher. So that was really interesting, and that sort of makes sense, right? If it's something that you don't buy that often, you're gonna do more research about, so you'd be triggered by the TV ad, and then the synergy with the paid search spend will be higher. But then another question was, does it differ by demographics? So we looked at different attribution models to find what's the optimal mix of traditional spend and digital spend. And this is the data for general population above 18 years of age. But then we also looked at that for were millennials in 2015. It's like 18 to 34. And we would expect it to be quite different, right? Because we'll look at media use, and we'll hear that everyone's cutting the cord, and the use of media is different, and we're like just all the time on mobile. And so we looked at how that differed, and the difference was not that huge. So it moved from 22% of digital spend to 29% of digital spend. And then obviously digital spend has grown a lot in the past years. This is the projection for 2016 on digital spend on different formats. As you can see, very large spend on mobile banners. So we wanted to look, and then we also have data on, from a creative point of view in how to optimize mobile and digital banners, but we also wanted to look from a media planning point of view, how can we optimize and what are the risks that we can face with mobile banners. So we looked at the effectiveness of frequency, and we saw that over-investing, the very high frequency, can even result in diminishing returns. So here what you're seeing is that the effectiveness of the 10th impression was 40% of the effectiveness of the first impression. But that was like 11% for the 20th impression, and then for the 30th impression, the effectiveness is pretty much none, 2%. And then we saw that there's a risk of even going negative. So that's something that's important to take into account.
Do you look at social as well?
On this one, let me make sure. I'm not sure if it's included. I will check later because I have that on the paper. Yeah, I don't have it on the top of my head.
There are different findings for online video.
Right. So, yeah, it's completely different.
I imagine it's going to be a lot lower threshold.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this only applies to banners. But since the digital spend on banner on mobile banners is so high, we wanted to look specifically at that. There's been a lot of move towards digital video by the end of 2016 and into 2017, which I think is a great idea. And I don't think that this risk will apply to different formats. But yeah, this was all the data from a media point of view. But then we also know that the creative point of view is very important. There are like different studies showing different numbers, around 70%, 75% of a campaign success being based on the creative quality. So we wanted to look also at the creative strategy that would work across platforms. And for that, we did 2 different original experiments using different KPIs, but also using biometrics and neuroscience. And we confirmed that advertising in more than one platform is better than advertising in one platform. So that's very clear. That was completely confirmed. And it was like even as simple as having in a lab experiment someone exposed to an ad once on TV, no, twice on TV, or once on TV and once on mobile, and purchase intent and unaided recall was 30% higher. So it was like just as powerful of creating synergies of having different channels sending you a similar message. But then what was like very crucial for that synergy to happen is that the message needs to be unified and the campaign needs to be unified, which means you don't have different agencies that don't communicate for different platforms. So you are actually reinforcing a memory structure that you build on one platform when you expose them on a different one. And then we also saw that there's a huge opportunity to increase effectiveness if you don't take, which is a very common practice, one execution that's developed for TV and then just put it everywhere, but actually like sort of customize that execution to different platforms. And something we're working on a lot this year is on learning how to customize to mobile, which are the creative drivers, which are what's the most appropriate ratio, if you brand early, if you don't brand early, and what's like the most optimal delivery format. So that's something that I'll be presenting at Audience Measurement. Hope you'll be there. But yeah, going back to this. We did one of the 2 experiments here. We were using electroencephalography to look at the brain activity and collect information about memory encoding while the participants were coming in, watching a TV show with commercial breaks and with ads for 6 different brands, and then right after they were listening to a radio show, also with commercial breaks, with ads for the same brands. But in some cases, those campaigns for TV and radio were unified, but in some cases they were advertising the same product, but they were not unified. So they were developed by different agencies, absolutely different creative, different execution. And what we saw is, like, I mean, it's sort of common sense that it's going to be more impactful if it's unified, but the difference was like pretty huge. We saw in memory activation that for when they were not unified, the activation for radio for the same brand was up to 57% lower than it was for TV for the same brand just like 30 minutes before. Like you just seen it, but since the creative is different, it's not triggering the memory of what you've seen on TV, and even the activation of memory was even lower. In other cases, it was lower by a little, but when it was unified, you were building, you've seen that on TV, and then someone is giving you the same message through a different channel, so you're creating that synergy. You're building on that memory structure, and we saw an increase in memory activation of up to 95%. So that was pretty high. And why is that important? Well, we see that there's a big opportunity there. First of all, because like 1/5 of campaigns, looking at the database, the creative strategies were not unified, so there's an opportunity there. But there's a bigger opportunity in that 44% of campaigns, they unified, but actually they're just repurposing one execution for all the different platforms, and only 38% were following these two steps, unified campaigns and customized for the platform. And that's important because we saw that if you follow those steps, the impact of your campaign is 57% higher than if you don't. And it's, I mean, like if you think about it, it's a common sense, and now we have strong data behind. So that was 2016, and these are some of the insights that we came up with. Invest in multiple platforms rather than just shifting dollars from one to another. Spend smart by adding traditional media to your digital investment. You can reach millennial on traditional media as well. Improve your digital advertising by being aware of the frequency, and of course create a unified creative strategy across platforms and customize the execution to the different platforms. So that was 2016, and now it's 2017. So we have 3 new research initiatives. One, again, research on mobile research quality that I would not be talking about. One on mobile ad effectiveness, on which are the creative drivers at work and what's the most optimal format and how people react to that. And I'm not going to be talking about that today, but if you're interested, I'll tell you all about it later, although I'm expecting the results now, so I don't have them yet. And then we have this other exciting initiative that we like to call cookies versus context, where we're going to study context effects. Context effects as compared to programmatic. So what's the advantage of premium value, of advertising premium instead of just using programmatic through different point of view. So we're going to look at the sort of like emotional response of the consumer, but we're also going to look at ROI data with IRI. So maybe you want to talk a little about it later. But why is studying context effects if we've been studying actually context effects for over 50 years? Well, there are some contradictory findings, so we want something like very objective that we can present where we're working together with a lot of different constituencies. There's no data on ROI that I think is going to be really exciting. There's not that much research on digital or mobile. Really now it's also more important because of the growth of programmatic buying. And we want to establish what's the value of premium content and also understand what's the way in which the context affects the ad in many different ways. So I'm gonna go through like little model and some of the results that we found from literature research and some data that the partners have provided. We do not have the results of the 3 original experiments that we're doing on this right now. Some of them will be available by audience measurement. But yeah, when we think about context effects, we mostly think of the effect of content of the program on the ad, right? But that's not the only way in which we're looking at it. There's also the effect of the device, of the media brand. Maybe if you see the ad on NBC, you like it more or less than if you see it on CNN or on Fox News. So there's something there. So the effect of the platform. And also ads do not exist in absolute isolation. So there's also an impact of the ad that comes before and within the commercial break, within the pod. And then this is a big simplification of all the multiple context effects that we can be studying, but we like to focus on that, so sort of like to simplify it and make it easier to communicate. But one would be attention transfer. So if you're paying more attention to the content, would that transfer to the ad? That's a big question. And then another very big one is which are the priming effects. So all the emotional reaction to the content and to the context, would it transfer to your ad? So that's the thing we're looking at. So focusing on attention, there's this study from Nielsen-Brown effect that shows that more engagement with content results in more engagement with ads. They found a pretty high correlation of 0.8 between recall of the program, of the content, and recall of the ad. So that kind of suggests that there's this sort of attention transfer from the content to the ad. But then when we talk about halo effect, so the most obvious example that we can think of is like sport events. So you have all that energy, all that enthusiasm. Does that actually transfer to the ad? So there are a bunch of studies working on that and showing that there's a transfer, there's a halo effect from this sport event or from the Oscars or for something that people get very engaged with to the ad, and that's why it's obviously ads are more expensive. But then we also want to look into alignment. So what if the ad have the same mood, the same mood, the same content, or different types of alignment with the content? So we looked at some data that's existing out there. This data is like from pretty fascinating study of RMT and Turner with data from Nielsen Catalina. And then, so they're looking at different brands and the response with Catalina data in isolation or where they are actually aligned in emotional drivers with the content. So they actually tag the program and tag the ad with emotional driver tags, and if the congruence was higher than 60%, they looked at the division. And the increase they found here with that congruence was about 35% higher in effectiveness with Catalina data. So that's a very strong study that's suggesting a very high effect of that alignment. Then this is like a very simple way to look at alignment, just at the mood of the ad and the mood of the program. So here you're looking at data from IPG Media Lab in brand favorability and in purchase intent. And this is always happy content, how that affects different ads. There are more serious, more neutral, happier, and happy content was always favorable, was always increasing the effectiveness of the ad. But when it was aligned, as you can see, favorability and purchase intent were a lot higher. And then you can go even into like more sophisticated ways of alignment. So this study that Bravo did with NeuroInsight, what they call neocontextual matching. This is pretty much like what you would do with an ad in the Oscars, making it like looking more like a movie or more related to the content. So in this case, it was something like lifestyle program or a fashion program, and then they would be presenting products that are not fashion, like a car, as a fashion item to make it match with the content. And they found an increase in memory encoding of about 17%. So we have a bunch of studies there that are really interesting or suggesting very strong effects of alignment between the context and the ad. But now we're working on answering these other questions with a bunch of new original experiments. And then we'll find out what's the return of investment of contextually relevant advertising, what's the halo effect of different types of content, what are the benefits of different types of alignments. And if you want to know the answer, we'll be telling you all about that at audience measurement in June. I hope to see you all there.
Any questions for Manuel before?
I have a question. What was the biggest surprise to you? What was the biggest aha, and maybe even something that was counterintuitive in what you saw?
Something that it's even hard for me to explain is we're looking at millennials versus general population and see that it's not that different, the optimal mix. personally, as a person, don't believe it. As a researcher, that's the data. So I know that the rest of the country is not me and my friends. But that's very shocking to me.
I also think what Manuel was talking about, when we did the test where you were 2 exposures of a video, TV and TV, and two exposures, 1 TV and mobile, I was not to be honest with you, I wasn't expecting to see a difference at all, because you're essentially you're getting 2 video impressions, and the fact that the TV plus mobile did so much better, even just separated by some programming and content, surprised me. Yeah,
that was very shocking, and also because in that specific experiment, the execution was the same. So it was not like you're seeing the TV ad and then some version of it on mobile that's optimized. It was exactly the same execution. So it was just the effect of the platform, and the increase was 30% on purchase intent and unaided recall. So that was also pretty stronger than expected.
Just wondering, were the participants all users of the product or in the market for the product or something like that, or were they just general population?
These are like a lot of different studies, since many of the studies are fundamental questions and not focused on any specific product or vertical. We would just make sure that they are not rejecting any of the categories or any of the products that we were using ads from. But it was probably never specific to product users. It was very general targeting.
Okay, I have the microphone. So those numbers from 22 to 28% also surprised me, general pop versus going millennial. I was trying to figure out how you measure the TV. Is it a traditional TV, watching from TV, or a TV program they watch through laptop or mobile environment?
This is a huge, what was that? This was like a pretty huge project of marketing evolution from 2009 to 2015 or something like that. So I think traditionally it's actually involving also like print and radio, and it's probably TV and TV, like linear TV. Yeah. TV and TV, because probably by that time we didn't have all this Link TV or any of those things, and I bet Netflix doesn't have it. But I bet like the Hulu and all those, they were not part of the mix, like traditional media. Yeah, I also wonder that.
Yeah. And are you planning to include younger generations, Gen Z, in this next coming one? So going beyond millennials? We have so many different screens.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious how they work together at the same time, looking at 4 screens as average. That would be very interesting.
That'd be interesting. We're doing, for the mobile study, we're looking at Gen X versus Gen Y versus millennial.
Yeah.
We're not looking at Gen Z, but it'd be interesting maybe for like the next round, the next iteration.
I just had a quick question about, you had a slide up there that showed alignment, the happy content, happy ads, that thing. How much of that do you think is just the happy effect, right? Just because people like happy ads versus not happy ads. Would it be any different if there were a different emotion involved? I guess is what I'm wondering, or a different something other.
That's a great question, and we're looking into that. So we saw there, because we also have like sad and neutral ads, and you're comparing that with each ad in isolation, and each ad in isolation had the effect of its own emotion. So you're comparing here a happy ad, and the increase in percentage was compared to the happy ad by itself. So it's not, so we're controlling there for the mood of the ad itself. But we could see that the happiness of the content was affecting all types of ads. Right. But then the alignment was higher.
And then, Joe, the study that's in field now with media science is actually 2 phases. The first phase is getting exactly that. So we're taking clips. I think we have 5 emotions that we're looking at. Happy, excitement, informative, which is kind of news-based, and then we're looking at some negative things, sort of emotional, sad, and fearful, suspenseful. And so we're testing the clips so that we know that the clips generate those emotions neurologically, and then we have ads, and we're testing a mix of ads where the ads match that feeling and where the ads don't match that feeling. So theoretically, the hypothesis would be that, like, for example, if you're watching an NBA game on Turner, that's very exciting content, and no matter what the ad is, right, you're going to get some halo from the excitement that's going to do better than you would do if you were watching the emotional, sad thing. And then we have an ad that uses a basketball personality, even though the product itself has nothing to do with basketball. Does that, you know, again, the hypothesis would be that now you're getting into the content synergy. Does that basketball personality, you know, have even more lift than kind of a regular ad? And then we're also looking, for example, at a basketball shoe ad, and does that product, because it's actually part of the game, does it even have more lift, or is it all the same, or that's an important part of the study.
So Manuel, one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about is, you know, if you think about television, the quality of TV production is getting better, right? And you have TV shows that are actually have pretty close to motion picture quality in the production values. And one of the things I think we spend a lot of time talking about is there some sort of quality barrier where if you run a really bad creative in a really great TV show, you know, or maybe the way to think about it is, do you have to, you know, do advertisers have to raise the game in terms of creative to match the quality of what's going on in terms of the content?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of any data around that, but I'm totally going to look it up, because I think that's a great question. If it has not been researched, I think we should. So that's really good. Really good point.
All right. Well, thank you, Manuel. Yeah. Okay. I'm now going to introduce Bhanu Bhardwaj from IRI. She's SVP. She's been 15 years in digital strategy and measurement. Previous to IRI, Bhanu was with the analytics team at Wyndham Worldwide and at Unilever in India, getting some traditional packaged goods background. Her focus has been on, you could jump in, as you know this stuff better than I do. Their focus has been on leveraging data and analytics to drive personalization and real-time relevance to impact targeting and media mix. Did I get that right?
I think so.
I think so. Let me introduce Bhanu.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I will talk to you a little bit about how to drive growth through media paradigms. Okay. So I did take the liberty of changing the topic a little bit and added some cross-platform elements to what I will share with you today. The results that I will share are based on marketing mix analytics. So we looked at almost 3 years of marketing mixes, about 62 mixes across 20 billion sales, 3 billion advertising spending, and we also used consumer-based measurement. So measurement of user-level buying behavior based on user-level exposure, and you will see both of those spread throughout the presentation. The focus, of course, is CPG in the results that you will see. Okay. So let's get started. So, you know, just to set the stage, right? With the advent of digital, we are all experiencing a big shift in the way we are consuming content and the way we are buying, right? So it's, you know, it's pervasive. It's happening every day, right? Social, digital, mobile, television, online video. There is a bombardment of new formats, new ways of talking to consumers, new ways of getting the message across. There are also, on the flip side, new ways of buying, right? So it used to be, you know, you used to go into a store and you would pick whatever you have there. Today, it's about e-commerce, it's about mobile commerce, and life is just getting much, much more complicated, right, for us as consumers and us as marketers as well. But on the flip side, it's also creating a lot of opportunity, because since all of this is happening in the digital world, there is a lot of data aggregation, which provides us the opportunity to know our consumers much better, right, to really talk to them on a one-to-one level and to personalize our message. And I think what's happening is that marketers are definitely taking this on as an opportunity, right? So they want to understand their consumers and really personalize. So what life stage is my consumer in? Is she a new mom? or is she a fashionista who's got a new job? And what hence are they looking for? What hence should we be talking to them? And where should we be talking to them? What is their lifestyle? Is it a hiker, or is it someone who's really interested in giving and donation? So hence, what is the right medium to talk to them? Where in their purchase cycle are they? Are they today ready to buy, or did they buy yesterday? And hence, any message I give to them is not really relevant for them from an immediate purchase perspective, but maybe an equity message is the right message for them, right? So there is really, truly an opportunity to personalize the message, personalize the medium, personalize the platform, and personalize your understanding of the consumer. And marketers are really, I think, starting to embrace that, right? And the way to really embrace it is to use it to differentiate. And advertising is a vehicle that will help with the differentiation. Because as we saw with the bombardment of different content, there is more need to create the breakthrough, create the recall, resonance, and create the recall. On the flip side, promotions, which, for CPG are a large part of marketing, are doing the reverse of the personalization. They are commoditizing, right? So when you go into store, and if you do not have a brand connection, and if you don't have the brand salience and the differentiation already in the consumer's mind, the first and most important thing that they will be thinking of will be price, right? So knowing all of this, we started thinking about, so what are marketers doing today, right? So they know the importance of personalization. They know that personalization gives them the opportunity to create differentiation. Advertising creates differentiation, but how are they spending, right? So when we looked at marketing mixes across, those 62 brands that I spoke about earlier, and we looked at how are they spending, we found that 66% of spending is on promotions, and only 34% is on media, right? So despite knowing the challenges, the shift in the equation on spending, it has not yet happened, right? And what are hence the consequences of doing this, right? When we looked at that, we looked at two factors. The first factor we looked at was if you look at what is the volume that those promotions are driving. So, when there is a price reduction or in-store display, they all drive volume, right? And what we saw was that almost half of that volume was subsidized. And what that means is that this is volume that consumers would have bought whether there was a promotion or not, right? So right off the bat, you're giving away half of your volume at a subsidized price without any reason to have to do that. And that's very important for CPG because it's a needs-driven category. It's a needs-driven business. So if someone needs a shampoo, they need a shampoo, right? They're not going to delay that. If they need a painkiller, they need a painkiller. So the need for promotions is not that high, but we saw how the spending is highly proportionally driven. Clearly, that has an impact on ROI.
Question.
Yes.
When you're talking about ROI, are you talking about the shorter term
yes.
ROI? Okay.
Yes.
So this is excluding any sort of long-term indirect
Correct.
effect.
Correct. So this is right off of the marketing mix, so it is short-term ROI. Long-term in our research, it has been between 1.5 times to, for some brands, 3 times the short-term, but this is all short-term. It does have all media. So it has traditional media. It also has social. It has digital, programmatic, mobile. It has all of those put together. So it's a mixed bag, but it is all short. Yes?
Question.
Yes.
Where does the competitive pressures on pricing and subsidizing come in?
Yeah, so I think that is one of the big reasons for the promotions being so important. So it's extremely defensive, right? It is not long-term. It is not equity building. It is a short-term mechanism which is defensive and oftentimes also driven by just the business reality of what the retail environment in CPG requires. So it is, you know, a little bit of it is a necessary evil, but is the 66-34 the right split, and is there a way to move away from that? Yeah.
Just a clarifying question: is the way you've defined it here, is the media that's directly associated with the promotion included in promotion, or is that included in media?
So the media that's for a shopper marketing program, for example, that would fall under promotions in this case.
Okay.
Yeah. But usually those budgets still now they're not that large. They're usually smaller programs, but they're not that large.
So things like experiential things, are you putting those under promotion? Or
Experiential things would be in promotion, but again, I think those budgets are not that huge. In it of itself, it might have a higher ROI, but it's a smaller share of that 66%.
A certain amount of an experiential thing might be advertised.
It could, yes.
So did you?
It would not. It would not, because usually when marketers, at least in CPG, when they're looking at it, that's usually coming out of either promotionally oriented budget, because often a lot of this is done in store, so it would come out of that.
That package goods. So what about someone like Turner? I mean, Turner and certain people here, you do a bunch of stuff that's experiential, but it's advertising. You know, like taking over the airport in San Diego for Comic-Con. There's a lot of advertising there. You're buying a lot of airport signage and things, you know, outdoor stuff along with it. So. But that would all have been considered under promotion?
So this is primarily CPG.
Okay,
so
it is, okay, yeah.
So, you know, I don't have a lot of examples like that. The ones that are there, they tend to be on the smaller side. So some of them may be in the media, but they're not going to be huge programs. Versus, you know, for a Turner, it's going to be probably a pretty big investment. Yeah. So we also looked at, you know, by industry, by category within CPG, what the breakout is, right? So we looked at beauty, beverages, food, home care, and OTC. And for most of them, we saw a similar trend, right? Now, the gap may reduce in some cases and increase in others. So, you know, like OTC, for example, highly needs-driven, not so much need for promotion. So, you know, you're seeing, and often not a lot of promotion as compared to other industries, not a lot of price-driven promotion, so the ROI goes up. Other categories where there is a lot of promotion, a lot of price cutting and competitive pressures, there is more promotion and hence more subsidization, and the ROI goes down. Right. But across the board, we did see that media overall had an edge even on a short-term basis versus promotion. We also cut the data looking at, within these categories, brands that are spending a lot of money on promotions or a larger share of their money on promotions versus media, and those that are spending lower share of their trade, money on trade versus media. So the darker is where you're seeing higher share of trade versus media, and the lighter blue is where you're seeing a low. And what's happening there is that even the media ROI is getting depressed. So not only is, you know, trade generating the lower ROI, but the media ROI also gets impacted, because in general, you know, with trade, the consumers are getting used to waiting for the deal and buying on deal, and hence it's impacting the brand equity, and hence media has to work harder for those brands.
Is that a hypothesis that because those brands, those categories are spending more on trade, that they're training consumers and therefore media doesn't work as well? Or do you have some findings to support that?
Yeah. So what we have seen is that brands that tend to spend more on promotions tend to have higher price elasticity, right? And price elasticity is an indicator of brand equity. So that helps us prove the fact that, you know, these brands that are doing more promotions are losing on equity, and hence their media has to work harder for that. So we have seen that, you know, not through the marketing mix, but through our price and promotions work, that brands that are doing a lot of promotions over time will tend to have higher price elasticity than those that are not.
So what happens if a brand sees the light, okay, and decides to change its ways? how long does it take to be able to recover?
Yeah. So I do not think it is, it's a switch. It cannot be a switch, right? Because it's not just a matter of seeing the ROI and seeing the promotional subsidization. I think it's also looking at, as you said, competitive environment, the retail environment. So it is definitely a step-by-step process, right? And what we think would help, typically, brands from an equity building perspective, we see that 2 to 3 years it takes them to start reaping the benefits of good creative and start seeing an increase in their ROI with an increase in investment behind media. So I think it is, it isn't a short-term path. It is a longer-term path. Right, but it is a path that in the long term will result in benefits for the brand.
Question.
Yeah.
What does brand image play in this? Is there any correlation between with better mix and
yeah.
brand image?
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, we did not look at it in this particular study, but I can tell you from my experience that brands that have higher equity and better image tend to have higher ROIs. They also tend to, sustain a dip in marketing spending better than other brands. So, we've looked at brands that stop spending or reduce their spending. Do they sustain their ROI over time? And brands that have higher brand image tend to sustain that over longer time versus brands that don't. So, for some brands, they stop TV and immediately, or they reduce TV and immediately their ROI erodes. Other brands will sustain it longer. It's anecdotal. I don't have any, full-blown analysis that I've done. Okay, so we did do some simulations to see, what would happen if brands were to change their spending, right? So, as you said, it's not something that you could change completely and by a huge amount. So we looked at a change of, say, 10% in their spending, and what we saw, so we ran some scenarios using diminishing return curves and using promotion spending and promotional elasticity, and what we saw was that with even a 10% movement in the spending, so if TV goes, or media goes from 34% to 44% and promotions go from 66 to 56, there is benefit in ROI for both media as well as for promotions. And media, it makes sense, with 34% spending, often brands are on the growth cycle of the diminishing return curve. Interestingly, ROI also increases for promotions, and I think that's primarily due to the fact that there was a lot of subsidization that we saw in the studies that we looked at. So there is an opportunity for improvement of ROI in general, both for media as well as for promotion by realigning the spending. Yeah.
So when you were running this simulation, I guess you kept competition as it.
That is correct. That is correct.
Huh?
That is correct. We did not. We did not.
Yeah.
A couple questions on this. Is this U.S.-based only?
This is all U.S.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you look at introducing any other elements of the marketing mix in here besides promotion and media?
Promotion and media in the marketing mix would capture most of the spending. So it does capture most, except for base drivers like distribution or things like that. Those are not included. We assume those to be same, and competition as well.
Okay.
But other than that, it covers majority of the spending. I would say it would cover maybe 90% of it. So increasing or changing the spending seems like a good idea, but it's not a simple task to do, especially in the cross-media environment, right? Because we know that consumers have so many more ads, so many more platforms to deal with. Marketers have so much more complexity to deal with, and almost 40% of them feel that their ads are not effective, right? So what is the way forward? So we started looking at some of the factors that are working well and what could be potential learnings for brands in that scenario. Audience fragmentation is another challenge, right? So they're not just looking at TV anymore, they're looking at digital, and even within digital, there is so much more fragmentation. So what's the right way, and what kind of an impact the right way could create for brands? That's really what we were focusing on. So when we looked at single platform, multi-platform results, and these are results from our user-based analysis, so this is looking at households that were exposed to just one platform, households that were exposed to two platforms, or more than two platforms, and what kind of an impact could that create, right? So when we looked at dollars per household, what we saw was just having two platforms, so having exposure on two platforms generates a 2 times impact than having impact on just one platform. And adding a third platform has an even bigger impact. Now the delta starts reducing, so there will be some leveling off, but adding platforms definitely has a big impact on the performance.
So, question on this. I'm assuming that this is not, these results here are not controlled for increases in media budgets, because normally as you add platforms, you're doing it because you've got more money to add platforms.
Yeah, so this is all based on sales lift, so it's all growth and sales driven. That does not have the ROI equation in it, so yes, that would probably lower the impact. But I think from a sales impact perspective, the opportunity is pretty significant.
In this case, when you go from 1 to 3 platforms, are we assuming the same media spend, or the media spend will increase?
So media spend would definitely increase.
So
yes, so that is
a combination.
It's a combination. Correct. Yeah. We also looked at, looking at multi-platform, we also looked at TV and digital, and one of the things that we found there was that in the brands we looked at in the marketing mix, as their TV spending was increasing, their digital ROI was also increasing. So there was the benefit of having TV on digital and its ROI and its performance.
Which particular digital channels benefited the most by TV? It was search, was it social, was it banner, was it online video?
I don't remember, but if I just look at the ROIs, typically, social and search tend to have the higher ROI. So if I just looked at those numbers, it's probably they're the ones that are benefiting the most. But I mean, I don't remember for sure. So given that, how should brands now think about planning their media in the cross-platform world, right? So now from what we are advising clients to do is to think of where, which is the platform, with what, which is the publisher and the creative, and what, which is the audience, right? So it's a combination of these three things, and thought of it in a 360-degree view. So looking at one thing in isolation is not sufficient. And in the subsequent slides, I will show you some impacts that each of these factors independently can generate. Now, all things are not additive. So think of it in isolation, what each one can do. And planning it all together will have a multiplicative effect on the performance. So starting with platform, right? So platform, what we've seen is the first thing to think about, right? And before you think of what platform, it's important to think of what is the brand's strategy, what is the brand's objective, right? Is it acquisition? Is it awareness? Is it gaining share? And hence, what role should the media platform play, right? Should it build awareness? Should it build engagement? Should it drive loyalty, or should it convert? And based on that, you think of TV, digital, online video, social, search, and mobile as solving what objectives, right? And brands that are able to think of these and align the brand objective to the platform and the role of the media have the maximum to gain. When we looked at some brands and we saw what kind of an impact they can get by aligning the right platform to the right brand strategy, we saw that from one platform to the best, from the worst performing platform to the best performing platform, they have an opportunity to change their sales lift by 2x. Now, this is looking at in isolation, so it would mean higher budget, but there is clearly an opportunity to reallocate across platforms to generate a higher performance. We also looked at publishers and networks, right? And here the impact is even greater because in the publishers is also programmatic, which is a very cheap way of buying media, but it can be less effective when it comes to sales impact. So here we saw the biggest, or one of the biggest jumps in sales impact when we looked at the comparison. So the best, most premium publisher or network can give you 5 times the impact, sales impact, as compared to the lowest performance. So it was one of the most important factors after choosing the platform that we think a brand should consider. Equally important is targeting. So understanding for your brand, who are you targeting, and generating the right audience with the right data is very critical, and it can have up to a 5 times impact on sales performance. And we've seen this across several brands that using their purchase behavior and using that to target them can change the effectiveness of your performance very significantly. Last but not least comes the creative. And when we looked at creative, it's a harder puzzle to solve, right? Because you have to think of your strategy, you have to think of the platform, the audience, and then in the purchase journey, where is that audience, and hence what's the right creative. And though today there is a lot of dynamic creative and a lot of testing with creative, but it does not keep pace with the fragmentation and the differences that are available from an audience perspective, right? So typical brands will have 2, maybe 3 digital creatives, typically 1 creative for TV, right? So the opportunity to match the creative to the right audience, to the right platform is something that's still evolving. And what we looked at in terms of what has been in market today generated up to a 1.5 times improvement in performance.
I'm curious, how do you make this work for fast-moving products where you might have multiple purchases per week?
Right. So what we do is that we look at multiple purchases per week per person or per person. Yeah. Per person. See, what we do is we look at exposure and we look at total purchase by that user in that time period. So our models look at 3 factors. They look at penetration, so did someone buy or not. They look at buy rate, so they look at dollars per occasion and number of occasions. So we model the 3 of them out together, separately, and we say if a household was exposed, did they buy or not, how much did they buy, and how many times did they go to the store. So we separate those 3 factors out. I mean, best case would be to look at each individual purchase, but that data is still not available, right? So we look at the entire week, but we separate out those 3 factors when we are running the model.
How do you evaluate the creative? How do you make sure it's matching the target better than whatever control is?
Yeah, so so this analysis is just looking at creative. If a brand had 3 creatives, and we looked at creative, the best performing creative versus the least performing creative. The objective is to just understand, are there differences by creative, and hence do brands have an opportunity to optimize if the creative is optimized.
And if it's properly targeted.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
We are looking at analysis where we do crosstab. So we look at within a particular publisher, how did the different creatives do, and that will help answer that question. But we're just starting to do it, so it's almost a cross-tab of publishers and creators. And we can do the same for publishers and targets, so that gives more insight into, is the audience right for the publisher, is the creative right for the publisher, is the creative right for the audience, but we're really in early stages of that.
Great.
I wonder if this data is available. So this publisher creative alignment is important.
Right.
But also the context the person is when they are receiving the from that publisher.
Yes.
Is there any data in the industry that triangulates this way? Because I'm not the same person when I'm home versus work versus swimming, whatever.
Yes.
Not really.
Not really. So
I am, but not really.
Right. I get it. So I think the research that Manuel referenced earlier that we are working with the ARF on. So we are working on understanding context versus cookies. We'll try to get to that a little bit, but it's an interesting question. But I don't think, I haven't come across something that has been done to answer that specific question.
It becomes especially important for multicultural.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah, but it is possible to start answering that because often, you have timestamp of exposure. So you can look at day parts. And if it's probably not the most accurate, but it will try to get you to the answer. Right, so morning versus when you're at work versus exposure, closer to purchase. Yeah. Okay, and from a digital perspective, we also are seeing clients use digital as a way to improve the creative, right? So understanding creative performance through digital will help understand what kind of creatives are working best with what kind of audiences, and hence optimize and make the creative improvement journey faster than what we've seen traditionally. So overall, summary of what we found is that, personalization and brand differentiation are very important in today's cross-platform world. Advertising is the way to build that personalization. There is an opportunity to shift money from promotions to media. Within cross-platform, the first thing to consider is brand objectives, and then looking at the different levels of platform, publisher, creative, and audience. There could be a 1.5 to 5 times improvement in each of those channels independently that could be had. So, most brands obviously will not be able to implement each and every one of those changes, but it gives the magnitude of the opportunity to optimize things. That's my last slide.
Thank you. Any other questions for Bhanu?
About the creative and the digital testing that increases the iteration, do you do that just comparing the different creatives independently of the creative drivers, or do you tag creative drivers to try to understand how to optimize a creative for a specific target?
So creative drivers, what do you mean?
Even like you have your several creatives as a whole, and then this one works for this target.
Yeah.
And that's fine, or because you can also tag what's happening in the ad, which are the creative drivers, if there's early branding, if there are people talking, or whatnot, to understand what appeals to a specific target. So I wonder if you go all the way that far.
Yeah, well, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet, but I think I think the kind of granularity that we are seeing is new, and I think as brands start adopting more, I think those kinds of questions will come up more. And
I just see you get super optimized personalization.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
That you
We're getting started again for the folks that are online.
Yes. Wait, I can remember. And then, do you have like corn or? Well, I know Mexico.
All right, welcome back, everyone. It's my pleasure now to welcome our host, ARF board member, Sadden Rangers fan, although I don't have anything to speak or brag about being a Blackhawks fan that was completely humiliated and embarrassed, and industry leader Howard Shimmel. Howard's the Chief Research Officer of Turner Broadcasting. He oversees Turner's TV and digital research teams. Prior to Turner, he was an SVP with Nielsen, and before that with AOL. So Howard, without further ado.
Thank you, Mike. Oh, wait, I got to turn this on. Is that good? Yep? Okay, great. Well, thank you and welcome to Techwood. Actually, hopefully if it doesn't rain, we'll be able to enjoy cocktails outside. The parts of the campus, we've redone them over the last year. I don't think we could have done a better job of turning this place into a really cool place to work. You know, you walk by and it's a sunny day and people are having meetings outside. It's just so cool, but welcome. This is meant to be not the cranky old guy, get off my lawn, yelling at the industry presentation, but a little bit more of a sort of, hopefully, a measured way to think about where we are in terms of audience measurement in the United States, and some concerns about the path forward and maybe what we need to do to course correct. You know, one of the things I worry about is that it takes so long to put through change in measurement, and you know, both Nielsen and ComScore are on paths there, you know, they're on their current paths now, and if we don't yell at them, and I love the fact that there are a lot of marketers in the room, because I actually believe that sometimes Nielsen thinks about audience measurement, or in ComScore think about audience measurement without thinking about that you guys are really the main clients. You know, we're all true, you know, we transact and we use Nielsen data, but at the end of the day, they should be building tools that make your guys' ability to be precise around how you spend your marketing dollars that much more better. And I think sometimes they think they're in an audience measurement business. No, they are in the marketing analytics world. So this isn't meant to be cranky. This is hopefully meant to be well thought out and hopefully give some direction, because you know, Mark mentioned something earlier. This is a team game, and I think, you know, it's up to all of us to sort of be clear with these guys about what needs to change in the future. So obviously, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the world could not, I started my career in 1979. I don't think the world we live in from a media marketing perspective could be any more different than it is. You know, it's sort of like, that was Earth, this is Mars, right? Everything about our business has changed and changed dramatically. You know, this is, I think, a really good way to sort of think about not only the fact that change is happening, but it's happening faster than ever. And you know, one of the things I think where our industry describing maybe media research, we haven't changed, and we don't change fast. And I think that's a real problem, because if the measurement world can't change to pick up a new platform quickly, you know, advertisers can't measure it, you can't plan for it, we don't have the effective tools to be able to sell it, and it sort of forces inertia back to the old way, and I think we all agree the old way is not really good. One of the things I think that's really important also to understand is not only is the media that people consume changing and how they get it, all the different platforms, the ability for us to have direct-to-consumer businesses, but the other thing that's changing is what we do on our air to make advertisers, give advertisers a chance to tell their stories better, right? So, you know, in the old world, we used to just sell 30-second spots. Well, we don't. You know, we have native. So Turner has a product now where we'll let an advertiser own an entire break.
So think about using this sort of the scale and the power of TV to tell a 2 or 3 minute story rather than to tell 15-second or 30-second story. You know, we have a huge team that's dedicated to brand integrations, integration marketing. And obviously, so it's not only the way people are consuming, but it's also the different ad forms that we're creating, and the ability to take that all into account is what a state-of-the-art measurement system needs to represent. You know, we have 2 incumbents in the marketplace now, Nielsen and ComScore. You know, one of the things I was thinking about is, I mean, think about Nielsen now. They're measuring, and it sort of goes back to the slide where we had all of the change, but 50,000 household panel. The panel requires cooperation of the people being measured, right? So if we don't put our codes on our content, Nielsen can't measure that. Well, that means that someone like Netflix, who has no interest in being measured, isn't measured. And when I think about, and I'll talk about this later, but when I think about part of the role, and there are a bunch of Turner research people in the room, part of what we are doing is we're doing consumer insights the way some of your marketing people at Advertise are doing consumer insights on your vertical. Well, imagine a world where Netflix is maybe 15% share in prime time, right? Imagine if you were trying to do consumer insights in your world and you didn't have line of sight to 15% of consumption. That'd be a problem, right? So the fact that we have small panels, right, 50,000 isn't big enough to measure national, and it requires cooperation of the people means that it leaves a lot of room for error. So sort of just expanding on that. So when I think about the role of measurement, it's a consumer insights database, right? So we want to be able to, you know, we need to do a better job of counting how people are consuming professional video, regardless of what platform, regardless of the distribution path that it takes to get to the device, the TV set, the mobile device. And we need to do that well because, you know, we're making bets on where consumption is going. If, you know, we did a deal, Turner, a couple of years ago, last year with Snapchat. Okay, you know, we need to understand if we do a deal with Snapchat, is that new audience, is that cannibalistic audience, and it's important for us to understand that. So there's a lot of work we do around consumer insights. It's a planning database, and, you know, when I think about planning, it's both from the standpoint of an agency trying to do holistic planning on behalf of a brand advertiser to figure out how to spend money to drive the most reach and frequency and outcome. For us, it's planning to think about how we maximize the value of our inventory. I mean, you know, it's no secret that growing ratings in today's world is a challenge, right? And as our inventory shrinks, we got to do whatever we can to drive as much yield out of every specific spot that we have to sell. And then it's a transactional database, right? When in TV today, when we are trading on demographics like adults 18 to 49, it is what we use to estimate our audience. It's what you guys use to count if we've delivered the audience. And you know, actually, I probably should have thought about this with you know, with some advertisers in the room, but it is also then a database that feeds into mix and things like that. And again, I think that's, you know, that was my mistake, but I think that's also Nielsen's mistake and ComScore's mistake that they don't sort of think about that. So, and I really, sometimes I worry that when ComScore and Nielsen are doing their strategic planning, they forget this. They think only about the right. I mean, we were having this debate with one of our partner research companies the other day about some use of their data. And, you know, we wanted to point out to them the only reason we pay them boatloads of money, we all probably overpay Nielsen, right? The only reason we do that is because we have to have their data to sell advertising to you guys. Not because they have great insights and they're wonderful people. It's we have to have them. And I just think they're
not bad people.
They're not bad people. But they've been able to drive the marketplace position because they are the transactional database. And I think that they think the future is more of that when it's actually not. It's more around planning. It's more around consumer insight. It's more about connecting to mix. And I don't know that they know how to sort of monetize that. So the way I've sort of been thinking about this is, and this is maybe the cranky old guy, get off my lawn thing, is I think we are at a bit of a crisis stage. And I'll talk through that through the next couple of slides, but mainly because I think the path we're on, first of all, it's happening way too slow. We don't have cross-platform measurement. I'll describe that all in a couple of slides. But the path we're on, we're not moving fast enough, and also then I think the destination of where we're going to isn't right. And I think until we get the vendors in a room like this to sit and listen to our needs and have them craft their business strategies based on what we need, not where they think they make money, we're going to have a miss. I also think that knowing that all good research does take time, right, and unfortunately you can't do high-quality research that I think any of us want to use in making business decisions. It takes time to get it right, so if we don't sort of speed up and get in the right direction quickly, we're just going to be further and further behind, and I actually think as it relates to measurement, we are. So here's just some reasons why. So I talked before, consumer insights. So, obviously, it's silly to say consumers are consuming content, whatever platform they want, when they want it, on what device they want it. There's a myriad, now if you think about it, we could, you could watch a TBS show on your TV through your cable box. You could watch it on your TV through our own app. The content could come to you through a regular MVPD, Comcast or DirecTV. It could come to you through a virtual MVPD. You can watch it on the tablet. You can watch it on a phone. So the amount of platforms where content can be consumed just keeps escalating and escalating. And even within the last couple of years, I mean, we just launched our TBS and AT&T Smart TV app in the last month. In the last couple of months, we've had new virtual MVPDs coming into the market, DirecTV Now, Hulu, YouTube. So, just platforms keep escalating. I talked about blind spots. So we have no line of sight to content that's consumed on SVOD services like Hulu, Amazon, Netflix. What is it, May 30th, Netflix releases the next season of House of Cards, right? We need to understand, we're launching some new shows on TNT in early June. We're launching shows that we're making huge investments in. It may be that there are a bunch of, because of the way people binge, obviously that's a real thing now. It may be that there are 20 or 25 points in prime time that are taken out of the linear TV market for 2 weeks from May 30th, right? I'm going to be watching House of Cards. And for us not to have that data to see and to forecast and to track accurately is really a major problem. And, that's where Nielsen's reliance on people cooperating versus being able to measure stuff regardless of whether they cooperate or not is a big challenge to us. And actually, stop me with questions, challenge me, please, let's make this interactive. So first is from a consumer insights perspective, there's this giant blind spot.
Do you think Netflix will ever change? In some ways it reminds me of an analogy when, scanner data, when Walmart wouldn't share their data, and this whole sort of shadow industry was, sort of created to try to track that.
Yeah. There are two things that I think give me not a lot of optimism that they'll change. The first is I think they just like being opaque. They know they're disrupting our business in massive ways, and I think they just like that. They're sort of cruel. But I think the other thing is, look, they are much, there's still parts of our world, studios, networks, who believe there's new revenue in selling their content to Netflix. And the thing is, Netflix has a much better idea of what a show is worth to them during that negotiation than we know, right? So I'd be surprised. I think the solution has to be, some passive way to measure them, audio signatures, video stamps without their cooperation. And I think one of the things Nielsen and others have been afraid about is Netflix is going to sue them for some reason. But I'm skeptical, unfortunately.
But Howard, with total audience, isn't Nielsen doing some of those things? Aren't they starting to measure Netflix with audio signatures and things like that?
Yeah, slow. It's very much a cooperative, you know, it's measurement of the willing.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Howard, what about Comscore panels? Are they able to track Netflix? Because that's 2 million, right?
Yeah, so what Comscore has, and it's still a little not as clear to us, is they have a way to tap into what your router is doing, right? So they are able to see the streams, so they know that your router is pinging Netflix. I think they're able to pick up some metadata that says it's Netflix. I don't know if in the metadata there is anything that says it's House of Cards, episode 3, and that they really truly have a measure of how much time. You know, more to, you know, that's actually, you know, I think we're pretty optimistic about that, but we just got to see. So again, the first problem is insights. Second problem is the ability for us to do precise cross-platform planning. You know, advertisers having their agencies have a real state-of-the-art data set that allows them to really piece together television, video, digital video on PCs, digital video on phones in the precise way to use these things in a complementary fashion, right? Imagine, you know, some of the data, Manuel, that you showed. I mean, the fact that people are getting 40 exposures on digital, I mean, imagine if some of those 40 exposures are, you know, against people who have a ton of frequency on TV. What a senseless waste, right? And you know, the fact that we haven't created a really great planning database that tells you you know, how to best use TV to avoid overlap with digital. How to make sure the frequency balances out is a problem I think that advertisers are facing. We're facing it from the standpoint of we can't do a great job of sort of taking linear TV and digital and mobile, desktop and mobile, and piece it together in the best way possible. I use the example all the time. Imagine there's an advertiser who wants millennials and they want the association with the CNN brand, right? That plan legitimately should be 50% mobile, maybe another 30% desktop, and 20% TV in very select places, right? You're not gonna reach 18 to 49s on New Day at 6 in the morning. You're going to reach them on Bourdain or soundtracks. And the ability to have a great planning database that allows us to sort of migrate from thinking about the elements and more talking about the overall schedule is where the planning is amiss. Okay. I think I just sort of said this. Sure.
So isn't this programmatic packages or programs taking care of that? Finding the right person in the right channel for the right program? It's just hypothesis.
Well, and we should make that a jump ball for anybody. So, you know, they're sort of, the way I think about programmatic is there are two things. One is data-informed decisions where you have great data that sort of tells you how to do that in a really good way. And I think we're probably better on the digital side with programmatic. I think TV's a little further behind. But then there's the second is sort of it's just the way it's being executed. You don't have you don't have buyers. You're letting machine doing the buying. I think we're okay there, but I'd love other people's perspectives on that.
Well, you know, I think that there were very, very high expectations, lofty expectations about what programmatic would be able to do. And programmatic certainly has been able to come a long way with targeting, but there's still some very important limits to programmatic. Not all programming is available through programmatic. In fact, there's some very premium programming, you know, which isn't there. It does tend to be digital-based. Okay, traditional media, not so much, okay? And then also programmatic is a bit like a robot. You know, it speeds things up, but you know, it's not necessarily going to be as intelligent as you would like it to be. That's where brands still have to provide brain supplied by, they're fueled by the right insight. So ultimately, while programmatic can get the job, make decisions, it's not necessarily going to make intelligent and optimal decisions unless you've got really great data to fuel it.
And just building on that, and I mean, again, one of the, Manuel talked about this earlier, that's one of the things that we're trying to get at with the context study, is there's a lot of research, and we've summarized it. I mean, we know that if your ad runs in the right environment, it's going to help the ad. But as you get to premium content, there's not a lot of research on the ROI of that halo or that context effect. So is it making sense? And as we talked about, does a funny commercial do better on funny programming than it does not? Or is the excitement of Turner NBA basketball lifting all boats in the water, those types of questions? Well, from a programmatic standpoint, right now when we talk programmatic, people are setting that programmatic algorithm to find eyeballs at the lowest cost.
Right.
It's not, programmatic isn't limited to that. If I had a funny commercial and I knew that it did better in funny programming, I would want a mix of some of the Turner sitcoms. I'd want to be on the Big Bang Theory and things like that, and I could set that algorithm, to Greg's point, if I understood the market better, to find those programs all the time. Programmatic doesn't have to mean I'm looking for the least expensive eyeballs, but that's just what it's become and how it's being used.
Yeah.
It also takes a lot of hands-on from the media person's standpoint, because you get yourself on Breitbart if you don't necessarily.
That's right.
There,
That's right.
So and that, if you just put in there you wanted to be on news sites because you thought news sites were good, well, you could end up there.
Right.
So it really takes someone still to humanly say that.
Yeah, and the thing you mentioned, I mean, we worry a lot about, we still believe, and you know, I think this will carry over with our new parents. I know there were a bunch of AT&T people. Welcome. You know, we still believe that there's a world for professionally produced content distributed through the existing distribution system. You know, we are, and the thing I worry about with programmatic is, if television is just sort of video, low cost, find the cheapest cost per thousand, it de-incentivizes us from trying to keep people in the TV ecosystem, and we're in a battle to keep people in the ecosystem. And actually, that's a great segue to this slide, because so we don't have cross-platform. It's not a new problem, right? I mean, if we were ahead of the game as an industry, we would have had cross-platform solution in 2005, right? I mean, this is not new, and again, I worry, you know, on the trajectory where Nielsen and ComScore might be going. I mean, if we have this solution in the year 2020, we're not going to be celebrating. We're going to be ruining the 12-year miss of what we should have had in the industry. From an insights perspective, you know, the change that's going on, you know, we used to think that Nielsen at least did a good job of measuring the screen, the big screen on the TV, but when you now think about all of the different ways you could use that screen, all of the different ways content gets to that big screen, our need to understand the path that people go through to access content. Like, I want to know on a regular basis, do people launch their TV and go right to their Roku menu and start navigating through there? And what are they doing when they're in there, right? I mean, that's now an important question for us to be able to answer on behalf of our management. Because on one hand, we should have an app in that space if we think there's a lot of foot traffic. But if it turns out that people just go to the app to launch Netflix, and that's all that's in their head, then, you know, we don't have to worry about this. And again, this is, you know, a place where more and more this is becoming an issue for us. You know, we need to understand the pathing, and it's just every day like a spider web that escalates more and more. You know, from a TV side, we're still locked in this world of C3, C7, you know, a very old school way of distributing content and getting paid for content. We have this concept that we still want to eventually get the advertising industry to think about, which is sort of C infinity, which is if you get an ad impression within your flight dates, it doesn't matter if the show was DVR'd yesterday or 2 weeks ago. What matters is your flight dates. When you guys buy digital video now, all you say is, here's my flight dates, and I want 1 million impressions in these 2 week period. Why can't we start to think about transacting TV this way? I mean, one of the things we know from a consumer behavior perspective is sort of every year a little bit more and more, the amount of consumption that goes on with original shows gets further away from air date. And, you know, I think it's in your interest that we, you know, the advertiser's interest that we keep investing in high-quality programming. So, you know, we still have to think about the model and how Nielsen measures this so that potentially we could move to a world where it's floating commercial ratings, and it doesn't matter. What matters is what you guys care about, which is your flight dates. You know, one really good thing that's happening in the industry is the move from age-sex demographics to audiences, right? You know, 18 to 49-year-olds as a demographic, maybe it was okay in the year 1968 when the world was a little bit more homogenized. It's not okay now. I'm a sucker for a cheap joke, as you guys can tell, and I always use, you know, the example of what industry would put Lady Gaga and Sarah Palin in the same segment? We do it, right? And so, but the ability to now move from 18 to 49s, 25 to 54s, which didn't really, you know, what it did is it gave us a little bit of security, I think both for the buyer, for the advertisers as well as for us, because it was big and it was forecastable. You know, but the move to audiences is something that's happening fast, and it's something that I think, one of the things I think we miss talking about enough is the fact that when you target, you drive higher ROI than when you don't target. And if we could do this at scale, we're going to help make the TV ecosystem a little bit healthier than maybe if we hadn't. So hopefully you guys read last month the announcement of OpenAP. This is a consortium that is initially driven by Viacom, Turner, and Fox. The concept is to build scale around audience buying, right? And you know, we just want to make the methods that each publisher is going through a little bit more stable. We want to make sure that there's a more consistency in data. I mean, one of the things that would have happened, each of us has had our own audience targeting products in market for a while. In the past, we might come to Coke and say, let's use Nielsen Catalina. Viacom might come to Coke and say, let's use ComScore, whatever their shopper data is. That just made it complex, messy. So the whole idea is it's an open consortium. You're going to hear, hopefully, over the next couple of weeks, more publishers coming in. It's open to any major, at least for now, existing national TV media company. So, you know, the hope is that you might see NBC in there. You might see Scripps, A&E, those guys. It's open to anybody. Basically, the way OpenAP works, and the platform and the infrastructure is being built by Accenture. The way it works is you as an advertiser or your agency on your behalf comes to AP and you register a target. Basically, you're going to go in and you're going to say, it's Coke. My audience target is medium, heavy category drinkers. I want to use Nielsen Catalina data. The definition is whatever. There'll be code books from these data sets. And that you want to get proposals from all three OpenAP, all OpenAP members. We each then go and deal with the advertiser or the agency in the way we do now, where we all do have slightly different ways to think about forecasting audience and optimizing our inventory. You run your schedules, you come back to the tool, you're going to get a unified post that's across all vendors. So you're going to be able to see, here's the Viacom deal, here's the Turner deal, here's the Fox deal. So what it's attempting to do is sort of streamline and standardize, let it be easy for you to see outcomes, have a verified post from someone beyond, so it's not us grading our homework, it's Accenture grading everybody's homework. We're really, really excited about the reaction we've gotten from the marketplace. The good news is that as we think about today's world, we do have really good audience data sets available in the market. Nielsen Catalina I've mentioned, ComScore Rentrack with things like IHS Auto. So the good news is there are really good data sets. One of the things we want to make sure we build into OpenAP is the ability to take in custom data. That could be, it could be a segmentation that you guys have created. It could be someone's CRM database where you have segments living in that. We want to build all of the plumbing and piping to make that stuff easy. There are a couple of things that are really important, though, that as it relates to OpenAP and the whole this whole discussion around audience, which is it's really important that we think about the data sets we're using. Something like Nielsen Catalina should soon be accredited by the MRC. We want there to be as much sort of comfort with using those data in the marketplace and in your investments as there is now when you use Nielsen Adults 18 to 49, because that data has been accredited forever. We need faster delivery, right? Sometimes these data sets are a little bit messy. When the match is done, when you get data, we need this to be, we would love to have overnight ratings for last night's NBA on TNT against beer drinkers. We need that data that fast. I mean, if this is going to be a currency, we shouldn't sort of take steps back. We need data controls, right? When we look at Nielsen data today, we don't have to worry about the fact that the adult 18 to 49 population is different from period to period. It's stable. They weight it that way. We've done some deals with, we've looked at some audience data where the size of advertiser targets differ dramatically period to period. And that's not because people are using less of the product. It's just that they're not being weighted properly. And obviously for us, we want as many verticals covered as possible. So what do we do next? And look, so I think, it's clear we need to move forward. I think the question is just sort of how do we do it? So, first of all, and it's sort of like, I'm going to say, bad analogy, you got to dance with the girl you brought to the date, but we are so far along with Nielsen Total Audience and ComScore X Media that I think we just got to push hard to drive those products to actual market adoption, right? We need to, by the end of the year, these products have to be in the market. They have to have sufficient coverage to be viable, to be usable by you guys. They have to have sufficient coverage so we see enough value in using them to track how our competition is doing. We all, one of the issues that sort of inside baseball, but because these things require some work on our behalf, we just got to suck it up and do it, right? We got to tell our lawyers, tough. We're in a bit of a battle with our lawyers. But we got to get these things over the, sort of further into the market, because if we're sitting here and you guys don't have the data to be using in 18-19 planning, we've just lost another year in the cycle. So we got to get these things over the ground.
Howard, question. This has obviously been a very laborious, drawn-out process, like a long labor that's become a cesarean section, and we're still waiting for everything to happen. But I'm curious, have you heard any updates from your vantage point? Are you seeing anything that maybe we haven't heard about?
No. It's been, I think it's actually been painfully quiet. I'll just pick on Nielsen because they're easier to target. But they had plans. They got publicly yelled at by NBCU Comcast. They sort of went away and and they've been just very quiet, and I think they're a little worried about being too active ahead of the market. But look, I think part of this is, and I don't think I should be able to go to my management and say, we have to be there because Coke's demanding us to be there. AT&T as an advertiser is demanding we need to be there. And again, I think part of what needs to happen as we think about the now and also the future is, I think your voice has to be louder among the media companies because it shouldn't be optional anymore, right? You need the data set as much as we do. So I think it's sort of been scarily quiet. I mean, we'll see what happens once people's attentions turn away from the upfront. But, it just has, I don't feel like there's any more momentum now than there was. We're still looking for ComScore to sort of fight their way out of some of their merger-related malaise.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and unfortunately, I think that's why I wanted to have this presentation. And this is the third time I think I've done it where we got to move, and we need to be better as an industry communicating what our needs are to these vendors. So as we think about the future, there are a couple of things that I think are really important. The first is, I don't think the job anymore is strictly around planning and measuring exposures. I think it's got to go to a world where we're measuring outcomes, right? And we've had an ad product in market with True TV and Cartoon Network and Adult Swim called Provable ROI, where our deal with advertisers is not GRPs and CPMs, it's outcomes. And we're guaranteeing outcomes and we're delivering to outcomes, and I just think that's much more of the future. And if you think about a measurement system where you're planning for outcomes, we're trying to deal with all of some of the variables that Manuel spoke to. That's where we ought to be pointing the ship. That's the future. We would love a business where that's what we're getting paid. We help you. Our media is directly responsible for driving some new customer acquisition. We'd rather get paid on that than paid on just running your spots. And I think we'd rather, just think about the level of what we could do if we had that shared responsibility. So the first thing is we need to think about the future differently. It's not just exposure, it's outcome-based. Part of trying to figure out what a measurement system looks like is you got to figure out what really matters. What can you measure? I mean, first of all, there's what can you measure in a big scalable way with big samples, and also then what really matters as it relates to does engagement of viewer matter to driving outcomes, right? Does someone who's watching NBA on TNT, their home team is playing, they're at the edge of their seat, is that ad exposure worth more in terms of driving response than someone who's sitting watching a show at midnight sort of half asleep passively? We need to sort of go through a process of really trying to think about all of the different things that we could be doing and find the ones that matter and use that as sort of part of our roadmap for measurement outcome. And one of the things, we launched a year and a half ago an initiative called Turner Ad Lab. The whole idea about Turner Ad Lab is we want to reimagine advertising to both make it less of an objection for people to watch linear TV, but also make it work harder in terms of driving sales for you guys, for the advertisers. One of the parts of Turner Ad Lab is this initiative that we're calling, we've called the measurement mandate. We want to do research to understand in a deep, deep way, sort of it's taking what I think Manuel did and diving down 4 layers deeper to figure out what are the variables we need an ongoing measurement service to capture, and then hand that roadmap to Nielsen, ComScore, and anybody else so that and what matters is what drives outcomes, what doesn't drive outcomes. So this is just like we did this analysis using Nielsen Catalina a while ago where we just wanted to say, does program attachment matter to ROI? Well, it turns out it does. If you advertise in shows where there are more people who are actively involved in the show, you get higher ROI with that ad spend than if you advertise in shows where people are just passive viewers, which obviously makes total sense, right? We'd hate it, it would be scary if it was a reverse. So I talked about this, as we think about AdLab, we're thinking about it from the standpoint of we want to think about the consumer. One of the things I think we fail to think about enough is as more and more advertising is going to be data informed, at the end of the day, there's a consumer who owns most of that data. It's theirs. And I think sometimes we think we could use it without really thinking about their willingness to let us use it and how much is opt-in. And so we want to learn about sort of the consumer part. We want to think about the deliver part, both in terms of what technology enables, in terms of different ad formats, in terms of what we could produce through things like native and integrated marketing. And then the last one is all around what I just described, which is we want to point to outcomes, and we need to think about what the syndicated ongoing measurement service is in the future that lets us do that. So this is, look, I'm concerned because of where we are. We're about to go through another upfront where way too much business is being done on women, on the Sarah Palin, Lady Gaga demo. But I'm optimistic because I think there are a couple of things we could do very quickly. One is get advertisers in the conversation. It really is important that somehow, like there's a Nielsen Senior Research Council. I guess I'm old enough to be there. There's no advertisers who sit at that table. It's agencies, and agencies seem to have less and less of a loud voice these days, and it's media companies. Well, I don't think we should be talking to each other. I think you guys should be talking to Nielsen. So, I think sort of getting you guys in the dialogue, making sure we know about where we want to go, and then, look, there are a lot of really brilliant people in this industry. We're blessed with, I think, the degree of smartness. I think as long as we sort of move in the right direction, maybe a year from now, we'll be all feeling a lot more optimistic. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Any last questions for Howard?
Don't you think that actually the agencies and the television networks or whatever will be the primary people at the table as long as they're paying the bill, which they kind of are the ones subscribing, because it isn't really the company subscribing, even though ultimately they're paying.
Pass back.
But Nielsen listens to where's the money, right? Follow the money.
But I think we got to change that.
Yeah. Oh.
I honestly think we got to change that.
Well, and to Howard's point earlier, that's ultimately the money. I mean, it's not, it's just taking a bigger view of it. I mean, because the money that the media people are paying Nielsen is coming from the advertisers.
No, I understand that, but
no. Well, they do. It just gets hard. It's hard to change. It's hard to change to Howard's point, the business is changing so fast. It's hard to keep up.
Hey, Howard, what do you think the tipping point is? I mean, it's all about rate of change, right? I mean, from an ad sales side, it's a 25-year-old who's negotiating a percentage increase versus client saying, I want data. So, like, where and when do you think that tipping point will occur where data becomes the currency?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think to a certain extent, the television business has gotten a little bit of a pass the last 2 years because some of our digital brethren did some really silly things, right? I mean, I don't know what sort of the last year would look like if you didn't have fraud and viewability and brand safety issues that, are sort of hovering over the digital world. And I think, I actually think we may have missed that tipping point. It might have been this year. I think it'll be really interesting to watch the next year or two. They're going to clean their act up. I mean, you saw Google reacted pretty quickly to start thinking about how to fix some of their brand safety issues. I mean, they're not going to sit and sort of passively watch it. I think we're sort of there. And this is where I sometimes worry about, like when we talk about open AP, we don't talk enough about if you target in TV, you get higher ROI than if you don't. What, and I'm sure you guys have looked at this, advertisers have looked at this, but there is no even when we just worry about demo CPMs, when you optimize on audience, you actually are optimizing an inventory that reduces your demo CPM. So for the life of me, I don't understand why an advertiser wouldn't do this at big scale. So look, I think we're sort of there. I think the next year is really important because if we could raise the ROI of television, I think that would give advertisers a reason not to be thinking about moving money, right? I don't know. Hard to say.
Hey, Howard. So, I mean, to piggyback on that, I think that was an interesting point, right? And so just thinking of the technology aspect of delivering video content to the consumers, right? The notion of a set-top box, it's rapidly disappearing, right? So in the ecosystem, does that almost make having a Nielsen obsolete at this point when, I mean, look, if you think about the digital side of things, I know every time the stream is started, how long people are watching. I mean, I don't have the demos, but there's ways to overlay that. I mean, if we controlled that, do you think that would change? I mean, especially considering the amount of money that, if you look at the, media industry is paying to a Nielsen just to be able to transact on whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. Michael, that's a great question. I think the thing about it is there's a role for Nielsen. It's not the counter role, right? They may be, I mean, look, we all deal with the fact that if we're using Experian or Epsilon or Acxiom, some of that data is really messy. I was in a meeting yesterday where someone said one of those data providers gets sex assignment wrong 50% of the time. I mean, just, but as you think about the need to get that data better so your targeting is informed by good data, not data where you'd be better off flipping a coin, I think, maybe their job becomes someone who is more involved in vetting the accuracy of targets, more involved in measuring outcomes. But yeah, I think you're right. Over time, the need to ask them to measure how many people watched watched Rick and Morty last night on Adult Swim. That's going to become less and less relevant to our world every day. Yeah, it's a great point.
All right, thank you, Howard.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things that we try to do with these events is as we did, and you guys have been terrific, is keeping it interactive. So the way we're going to wrap it up today and sort of put a bow on the day is with a real diverse industry panel talking about a lot of the things that we talked about today. Where can this panel add value? Going back to what I said at the beginning, what are the big global things that we all need to work on as an industry, and what are the things that they learned today that they can take home and bring back to their teams tomorrow. To moderate the panel, let me introduce Professor Doug Bowman at Emory University's Goizueta School of Business. He's a professor of marketing. He's the McGreevy Team Chair, Senior Associate Dean for the Working Pros MBA program, and I think most of you in here in Atlanta know that that's really one of the best MBA programs for executives in the country, not just recognized by the large corporations, but receiving that recognition from Bloomberg Businessweek. Doug is also a well-known, widely published researcher and an authority on quantitative aspects of marketing. So, Doug,
thanks, appreciate it. So we've got a panelist. Come on up. I'm the moderator, not the panelist. I think they're mic'd.
Yeah.
Joey, you mic'd?
Yep.
All right, well, come on up. We got about sort of 20 minutes or so, and so I think a good moderator is like a good sort of umpire in baseball, meaning by the end of this panel, you shouldn't even really recognize me because you'll really be focused on the panelists. And so what I'm going to do is have each of the panelists sort of briefly introduce themselves. We're marketers, and so as marketers, what we often do is infer something about people from their behaviors. And so what I'm going to ask them to also tell me is, tell me the last TV show that you actually watched live or in its first original airing, what it was and when that was versus, okay. So we'll, Joe, we'll start with you.
You've made it harder than I thought this was going to be. So my name is Joe Empert. I'm at AT&T. I am primarily responsible for market mix modeling for the wireless part of our business, although our group now does handle, in addition to wireless, we also do broadband as well as video. So I also work special projects that kind of cut across those business lines as well. As far as the TV show goes, probably Big Bang Theory.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. In the last week or a year ago?
I would say probably 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Great.
Hey guys, I'm Greg Pharo. I work for Coca-Cola in our global marketing organization with media analytics and advertising research. The last couple of programs I watched live were Veep and Silicon Valley.
Recently or months ago? Recently.
Oh yeah, very recently.
Okay. Good.
I'm Karen King in the Department of Advertising and Public Relations at the University of Georgia. Prior to that, and I've been there for about 300,000 years, I worked in advertising at FCB in Chicago. I was in media planning for a while, and then I was a research supervisor after that.
Great.
And, okay, really hate to admit this, but I don't know what order it was in, but the Grammys, the Emmys, and the Super Bowl, the latter only for the commercials, were the last live television that I watched.
Okay, great, good. All right, let's start with, think back, the first presentation was really around sort of context and just some thoughts or comments around sort of context from you. One of the things that sort of came to mind, and maybe you could comment about this one when I watched it, was, Joe, you made the observation, happy programming, happy commercial.
Yep.
A lot of the studies around context are really cross-sectional snapshots. We're allocating media over time, and so some exposures are going to be in different contexts, and a little bit about sort of the longitudinal aspects of context would be interesting to hear from you about.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done some research on context in the past, and it normally has to do with sort of alignment with, one example would be sports programming. So we have done some things around just understanding if we've got a sports-related advertisement in a sports-related program. We've seen similar results to what these guys have shown, what the ARF has shown. So I think that's a good thing. I think it's become increasingly important to us because in market mix modeling, we've been getting better and better at getting down to more granular levels. But we get down to such a level, we ask ourselves a lot of questions. We're good at getting new questions, right? But then actually answering those questions gets into things like context. Well, what's causing this phenomena to happen? What is it about the alignment that we have that is not getting us the results we thought we would have? So we may have good alignment with the actual consumer segment, but what is it about the program itself that may not be giving us the performance that we think? So longitudinally, I think it's going to become more important to kind of track that over time. I can't say that we've really done that, particularly at AT&T, all that well, but I think that is important because, like you said, it changes drastically over a period of time.
Great.
Yeah. Certainly, context matters, and the thing about contextual relevancy is that it can vary for a variety of different reasons. Certainly, with Coca-Cola, we have products which are very seasonally relevant, and so from a longitudinal standpoint, that's something that we have to take into consideration. Not just contextual relevance, but event and seasonal relevance as well. So I would say that part of it becomes a juggling act in a way. You have to be able to try to be as optimal as possible within a contextual environment, but you also want to be able to balance that with the need to properly target, with the need to balance the portfolios and the various campaigns that you have going on. So think about it in many ways like a juggler who's got, 4 pins that she's juggling, and then you throw in a 5th, a 6th, and a 7th. That's what's really going on. Life is complex.
Karen?
Great. Well, media context has been called many things, as you know, over the years. I mean, starting back in the 60s, they were calling it qualitative factors and moving on through. And it has been an interest of mine for a long time, so finally got a doctoral student interested in it, and she did her dissertation on it. And so 4 of us have been working on the data. We just finished a fairly large meta-analysis. We looked at all the studies in this area from 1965 until 2015. We did not include digital in that data set. We did do another data set that included digital because there wasn't any digital much in 1965, actually. Anyway, but we did find some of the things you were mentioning in terms of patterns of what was out there. And of course, this is published research, so anything that you have done that's proprietary wouldn't be included in that. I just, for example, consumer involvement, media context, congruity, higher program liking, those were things that tended to lead to higher memory, and by memory it was looking at both recognition and recall, because those were actually the 2 things that were most commonly measured in those studies, were recognition and recall. We also are looking at the other measures as well now, but that was the first group that we looked at. And looking at the data for digital, it was actually, I have my cheat sheet here, because we just finished that one. Media congruity and involvement with advertising were more frequently examined, and they positively influenced recall, attitude to the ad, and purchase or click intentions. So those were some of the things, and again, those will be coming out in a little bit, but some of the things that you're talking about we actually found in the patterns. However, most of the studies were experiments, and most of them, and a lot of them were done with students, which isn't as good as, like, for example, what you guys are able to do now with looking at the data. But
although it's interesting because there are other data sets, that would tend to echo those findings. Some great work that Nielsen has done with their brand effects group, and I think has, speaking from an advertiser perspective, during the course of my career, I've been exposed to a couple of different data sets in different categories, and have seen that yes, context does matter. It is maybe not the supreme element there, but certainly is one of the more important elements for driving advertising impact. And very importantly, those brands that have done deep dives to really understand how it works, it's not just an improvement, a lift in upper funnel metrics, such as awareness, such as brand recall, such as saliency, likability, et cetera, but very importantly have been able to trace measurable impacts to sales, getting a sales lift from it.
Right. I was going to add to that too. I think that is very important because ultimately in our group that's what we're looking at, but we're also looking at costs as well. So I think another aspect of this is just because you have a good alignment between, say, an ad and the sponsorship you may have that's associated with it, doesn't necessarily mean that's the right decision to take, right? You have to look at it in the context of what the cost per gross ad in our case or per sale is for the other media and other properties as well. Well, it can create a very different picture when you layer on the spend.
That's sort of the dirty little secret there is that contextual relevance comes sometimes at a cost. Right. And sometimes, it is a price worth paying, sometimes not so much. It also, of course, varies from brand to brand and category to category. The type of programming environment that might make sense for AT&T to be in might not make sense for one of our brands to be in, okay? There's also, I guess, some very interesting findings one can have about contextual relevance depending on what media you're in. So I'll be very interested to see, what your findings have about that.
And we did look across various media, so that'll be coming out as well. But of course, the early studies, those were all done in print. They were done with magazines. I never pronounced his name correctly, but Apel or Apel or however he pronounced it, he did a study in 1980 that was looking at, some of the publishers had done a study and found that this is going to shock you, but some people don't think that ads in National Enquirer is believable. They are in some other media. But what he found is, but if you did the study among readers of National Enquirer, they thought it was just as believable. And I worked on accounts where you could, like, I worked on Dial Soap, and if you worked on Dial Soap, you know, it didn't matter if you were in National Enquirer, it mattered if that was the audience, because the brand was believable, and it wasn't the kind of product where believability was really actually an issue. There were many kinds of products where you wouldn't want to do that, of course.
Yeah, there was maybe we'll start with you, Greg. There's a question after the second speaker that was looking for sort of linkages between the first two talks. So the idea of sort of context and personalization, and I wonder if you could share some thoughts about how those two issues could potentially be linked.
Context and personalization. Wow. Well, I mean, that's sort of the holy grail to be able to solve simultaneously for that, you know, and that's one where, you know, I'll give you a different answer depending on what day you ask me. Today, you know, it's really about quality of data and being able to link together quality of data. You know, there was a time where I used to have a full head of hair, you know, and then I encountered this issue of trying to be able to bring all this together, and, you know, it's frustrating, you know, it's one of those rip out the hair moments. So I would really, you know, I would certainly echo and second Howard's concerns about being able to make sure that we have all the data necessary, you know, in order to really be able to have a good, crisp vision of how to solve these.
Mm-hmm. Joe, Karen, any comments?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there can be a lot of emphasis in the personalization. It's kind of the talk of the town right now, I suppose, right? How to target and how to get down to the individual level. And we've done a lot of work in that area as well. And like I mentioned, we've done some work in context in the past, but we haven't necessarily done a great job at linking those studies and the data from them with the modeling that we're doing at the more consumer segment personalized level. And so I think you're right, Greg, that data is very important. Having that consistent data that can translate across from a study into a model, basically, I think is very important.
And I know Mark Zuckerberg has thought for a long time now that I'm bald, trying to sell me hair growth products all the time. And lately it's Viagra, too. So, you know, somehow I'm a male, and probably an older male, given the Viagra thing. But, you know, so even using, you know, desiring audience-specific something, there are still not good paths to get there. Yeah.
It's important that we make sure that we don't over-rotate into targeting, just because there are great new technologies, great new tech stacks available, you know, that allow us to target. Doesn't mean that that becomes the end-all, be-all, okay? Targeting, like we mentioned, is only as good as the intelligence that you put into it. And part of what's necessary also is to make sure you've got the right way of expressing yourself to the right consumers. So having brilliant creative, and very importantly, having a product or an offering or a service that's going to be relevant to that particular audience is just as important as ever.
Did I hear you say that there's too much targeting, or there's a potential for too much targeting?
I think that I don't know that there's so much that I would say that there's too much targeting, but I would say that sometimes we get too enamored with targeting and think, oh, if I just solve for targeting, all my problems go away. Yep. The reality of it is that even nowadays, as targeting has gotten better, there's limits to what it can do. How many people here have, you know, been victims of bad retargeting, you know, getting the same hotel showing up, you know, when you've already made your purchase, okay? Yep. And it follows you around like some zombie that just won't go away, okay? The point there is that while we have this brave new world that gives us many more opportunities for targeting, that it's nonetheless very, very important to be able to think about marketing fundamentals. And sometimes that means being able to step back from targeting and think about when it is appropriate time to be able to talk to, you know, to something other than a targeted individual or targeted household. Just food for thought there.
Yeah, I think there's there's definitely benefit, too, in just keeping in mind the whole idea of just brand building, you know, sort of more generic brand building, especially in this age where a lot of our companies are merging left and right, right? We've got a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of need to kind of re-identify or remarket yourself as whatever company you're trying to become. And so I think there's still some definite benefit to keep that in mind at all times and say that there are a lot of long-term benefits to keeping that in play.
I was glad to hear you say that, actually, because one of the things I hear from advertising people is that, you know, of course, programmatic isn't just digital anymore. It's going into other things. And one of the reasons is pressure from clients because they feel like they're being pinched financially. So if clients are wanting things to be more financially efficient, they're going to more likely use something like, you know, well, artificial intelligence programmatic is that. So, yeah, but if we're saying context matters, there still needs to be intervention from people, and clients need to be willing to pay for that.
I'll ask a couple more questions, and then we'll kind of turn it over to the audience. And so my next question is really just who's doing a really good job, you know, and, you know, other than your own firms, you know, who are you out there watching to sort of get some thoughts and ideas for things that you guys could potentially implement?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think there's a lot of good work being done. As much as we kind of slam Nielsen, I think there is a lot of good data and a lot of good things that come from them. So I think they're one company that we've you know, continued to have good relationships with and do work with. Gosh, there's tremendous benefit from other companies as well as industry groups. You know, we just get a tremendous amount of information from groups like this. Because it helps us kind of get informed as to what some other companies are doing that we may not necessarily be in contact with on a regular basis. So I think, you know, we're constantly discovering new vendors that can add something to our market mix modeling, for instance. So I think that's something that is great, because one thing we found is there's no silver bullet when it comes to media analytics and market mix modeling in particular. And there's always a new methodology that should be tried, or some new approach to get us an answer that we don't have an answer to yet. So, yeah, I think it's very beneficial to keep looking.
Are there any specific companies or advertisers that you see are kind of doing a good job besides Big Red?
Well, you know, I don't know that I want to pick on or call out too many specific advertisers on this one, but I'd say, you know, let's not forget that the work matters, okay? Ultimately, brilliant creative matters for a lot. And I think that from a cross-media standpoint, what really, one of the things I really look for is a campaign that's well-crafted with individual content that's designed for various media, rather than just taking a 30 or 15 and doing some nip and tuck and repurposing it. I think that being able to activate in new and alternative media are particularly important. Experiential is extremely important, and those brands that are doing a good job with that and making sensible media choices. And also, it gets down to Media 101, knowing who your target is and being able to bring in need state and behavioral information. You bring that all together, and there's an advertiser who's doing a good job.
Thoughts about best practices?
Well, I have to agree with what they've said, and just maybe another way of saying it is kind of, you know, knowing the right audience and knowing when they're most receptive to the message, and when you can reach them at those times and where they are at those times. And not every place they are at those times is where you want to reach them. I'll give you that. But I agree. I think there is a lot of good work going on right now.
So last question for me before I turn it over to you is just what's keeping you up at night, Joe, these days?
The incredible complexity. I can't stress enough the importance of good data. We've talked about that a couple times. And I think because the data is getting more and more complex, there's a lot we want to answer through our modeling work. But it's getting harder to manage, frankly, because there's a lot of great information coming into play, but we have to make that information usable for the models that we build and the things that we do. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is just the data complexity and how to whittle that down to something that's usable and usable in a timely fashion.
Good. Great.
Well, what keeps me up? Well, besides having a teenager at home, other things that keep me up, unlike some of you, I'm working with globally, and I can tell you that all of the weeping and gnashing of teeth that we have about the situation here in the U.S. is nothing compared to some of the weird, wacky, wild situations that we have dealing with other parts of the globe. But I would say that, here in the U.S., one of the things that keeps me up, frankly, is dealing with FANG, okay, dealing with the Facebooks, okay, and the Netflix and the Googles of the world, dealing with walled garden environments, dealing with figuring out, okay, are the ROI studies, which they show us, legitimate or not legitimate, figuring out how to take some of the wonderful data they have and try to piecemeal it together, with other data which is around, trying to figure out how to solve for issues like attribution, okay, in a multi-channel environment. These are some of the things that keep me awake at night.
Good. Karen, thoughts?
I sleep really well. No, but I mean, I have very different kinds of concerns, and they do, of course, needing to keep up with all that, but I actually find that to be terrifically exciting. It's like never dull. I never know everything. I never know close to everything. And the fact that so many of you that are in the industry share your learnings with us is really important, so that we can pass them on to the students, or so that we can get copies of papers that you've done, or have you Skype into classes or whatever. That's very helpful to try and prepare students as well as we can for the future kinds of jobs that you need them to fill.
Great. Good. Audience? Who can I cold call on?
So, we shared that the ARF is looking at some of these contextual things. What goes now into, and we talked about reach curves and things like that, and Turner's here too. So the interesting thing is when you do move just beyond placing ads into a sponsorship arrangement, and both of you companies were heavily involved in March Madness. Mm-hmm. Being a March Madness viewer on a lot of Turner properties, Howard, but I saw the same ads over and over again. I mean, my frequency went up through the roof on those things. So how do you evaluate the ROI of that sort of contextual relevance, viewer engagement, but your frequency is?
Yeah, I think that's an important.
So how about if I just make sure to paraphrase it relatively quickly? The observation was March Madness. There was sponsorship, plus there was ads running sort of at the same time, and so the frequency in some ways went through the roof. And how are you dealing with trying to understand the ROI from that?
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think we're discovering more of that as we get more granular into the analytics that we're doing. And I think it's not something, at least say in our group on the media analytics, marketing, mix modeling side, that we necessarily would have paid as much attention to, a year or two ago. But now that we're getting more granular and can see what we're doing at individual channel levels, cable channel levels, when we start seeing things that don't seem to make sense, like why aren't we doing well here? We're hitting the segment that we're trying to hit. Why is it not performing well? Those are the kind of things we're starting to discover. Maybe the frequency is just ridiculous, or maybe there's just something else going on that we didn't have visibility to before.
Yeah. It's a complex question to answer, okay? Some of the largest advertisers like Coca-Cola and AT&T will typically have 3 or 4 different approaches to try to answer that. One will be through market mix modeling approaches, because when we have extremely important properties, World Cup soccer, for example, March Madness, okay, we are able to go in and use some multi-stage mixed modeling approaches to understand what sort of sales lift and what sort of ROI do we have, okay? So we're able to at least get a feel for how different types of properties perform, how different sponsorships perform. That won't necessarily answer the question on frequency, but you can always compare to see, okay, where you had higher frequency, versus lower frequency in different sponsored environments. Another way that's answered is through research. There is a place for just good old-fashioned consumer research to answer these questions. And frankly, that's where we see, through integrated marketing communication tracking style studies, we're able to get some answers there. And then, frankly, there's also increasingly room for experimentation, okay? It becomes a lot easier nowadays with the way that that video is delivered to be able to set up split cell designs. And frankly, that's where you're going to be able to get some of the cleaner answers on how frequency will impact things. I would mention, though, that even though a TV spot might be served up multiple times, if an advertiser has put together a good campaign, hopefully, that campaign will have several different spots in it. So you're not always exposed to the same thing. And also, and this is where it gets really interesting, if it's a really well-crafted spot, it's not going to necessarily wear out right away, okay? Certainly, being able to sensibly manage frequency matters, but it's also important to remember that wear out for TV spots that are well put together, is not going to be nearly as big an issue as wear out you're going to see in a digital environment. Wear out of creative in a digital environment is a very, very real risk. That worries me a lot more, as an advertiser, than wearing out a well-crafted ad, in a television environment.
Great. Karen, any thoughts?
Well, I was just going to agree with you, but part of the reason I think is that when someone is viewing something on something other than a television set, their laptop or their mobile device or their iPad, they tend to suggest that they're actually paying more attention than if they're viewing it on the television set, getting up from the room and going to do things. So, it may be that you get worn out faster if you're actually watching it more closely, or if it's right in your face versus if it's in the room. But I definitely do think occasionally, things can wear out. Too much frequency is definitely not good all the time.
Other questions? Yes, one of the themes of the Turner presentation with this idea of sort of standardizing data. Comments? Not to put you too much on the spot, but are we going to get there?
It's from my perspective, it's going to be a battle that's always going to be there, right? I mean, it's something that from a modeling side, that's what we're always after, right? We're always pushing for standardized data that's high quality, and it's the reason that we've been able to build the program that we have to this point at AT&T is because it's really dependent on very strict data governance and good standardized data. So to me, it's something we're always after. I don't think the battle will ever end. In general, but I think it's something that we're definitely getting better at, and I think there's more visibility to the need for that. So hopefully we'll get there. We'll get there one day.
I'd like to touch on a couple of themes that Howard raised. Okay, being able to put pressure, onto certain quarters out there can make a difference. Okay. Demanding MRC accreditation for data is a good start, okay, just to make sure that everything is on the up and up, okay. I think also we can look at where we have, as an industry, had some success recently, okay. There have been issues of ad fraud, which, and issues of just misfeasance, which have, and incorrectly counting data, which have occurred within the digital realm. And we saw pressure from advertisers. We saw a lot of activity on behalf of the ANA and other groups. And this sort of agitation got some results. I would suggest that, we look at that, that would tell us that there is opportunity for us to come together, especially, let me pick on advertisers, large advertisers, to be able to come together and really try to move the needle on data standardization, because it's not going to tend to happen on its own. There are too many disincentives that certain entities have, for not wanting to do it. In some cases, it's just inertia. In some cases, it's because they're not going to benefit from sharing out data, that they benefit from the chaos. So this is something where I think that the advertising community, the brand community has to be able, to use power of the purse in order to affect action.
Great, good. On that note, let's thank our panelists.
Always difficult to be the man between the wine and cheese, so I'll go quickly. And along this, I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank all the speakers. I want to thank our sponsor, IRI, and our host and sponsor, Turner, for helping us put this together. We appreciate the opportunity, all the speakers. A couple of quick things. We mentioned a little bit, you saw some of phase one of this original research that Manuel was talking about, and you heard from Howard about cooperation, things like that. Those are topics and themes that will be highlighted at our audience measurement conference, which is June 12th and 13th in the New York City area, where we'll be taking a little bit deeper dive into that. So we're hoping you could all come out and join us. Other things, if you go to the ARF.org, on the 17th of this month, we have our Leadership Lab program. Howard was also helpful in getting that off the ground. That's a training program for mid and junior level people. The program on the 17th can be attended live if you fly up in New York, but more importantly, it's available, it's streamed and available on demand after the fact. This session is a half-day session on storytelling and how, from a data standpoint, it's great to have all the data, and it's great to have these complicated charts and Excel things that we all understand, but if we don't translate that to the marketing people and get them to take different action, so what? So how do we tell that story? How do we get the insights across? How do we visualize the data? And then the other area that we're involved in with the ARF is shopper insights. We looked across the country, we threw a dart, we randomly decided, hey, why don't we do this in Bentonville, Arkansas? Just randomly, no reason other to be there, other than the weather be nice in July. Although they do have a nice ice cream place there for the weather that's in July. But if you'd like, we'd love to have you join us at the Shopper Insights program. That'll be July 19th in Bentonville. And I think that's the last thing that I have. Yes, cocktails. Here we are. And for those online, thank you very much for joining us. We can't share the cocktails with you over the streaming, but we appreciate you joining us for the content. Thank you.